Hello and welcome back to Programming for Biologists. Today we're going to be looking at variables, what they are, how to use them, why we need them. So as usual, we can go back into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go ahead and open up the folder that I'm using for these courses. And I'm going to create a new notebook. So I'm just going to call this lesson 3. I mean, they're not really lessons, but video 3, I guess. Okay. So I'm going to make all the code that I'm writing available on my GitHub. I will put a link in the video description below. So if you don't want to type out and follow along, that's fine. You can just download the scripts later. So what are variables? So variables, you can think of them, they're basically just containers. And we use these containers to store information that we want to use later. So in this little section of code here, I'm just going to define a variable. So we can basically call variables anything we want. And I find it's best just to be as descriptive as possible. So I'm going to define this variable and I'm just going to assign it to 1. Now you can see when we run this, it doesn't print anything. And that's because in this section of code, we're just creating this variable called I am a variable, and we're making it equal to 1. So what this means is that we've basically just made that equal to 1. And that means if we then go and use this again, so you notice that in Visual Studio Code, as soon as I start typing I, it brings up all the things that I could be possibly typing that it already knows about. If I put in an underscore, the only thing that's in there now is this I am a variable. And I can just press enter and it will autocomplete. So what this is basically doing is saying, I already know what this is, and as I'm typing the variable name, I can just press enter, and then it will fill it out for me. And this means you can type code quite quickly in Visual Studio Code because it sort of predicts for you what you're probably going to write based on what you've already written. And we'll notice if we run this now, it's just printing 1. It's not printing our variable name, it's just saying this is 1 because I'm a variable is equal to 1. So it's basically just equivalent to 1 because that is what is in our container. Now, when it comes to variable names, there are some rules. So the important thing to remember with variable names is they have to start with a letter. It doesn't matter what you call them. You can call it whatever you want, but it has to start with a letter. And then that's fine. We don't get any errors raised. But if we were to try and name our variable with a number, then we're going to get errors. So if we run this now, it's just going to be saying, okay, what's the syntax error? You know, it's trying to read this as a number or something, and it doesn't know what this is because it's this unusual combination of numbers and letters that Python isn't expecting. As before, anything with a little hash in front of it is a comment, So comments are super useful because they're just bits of text that the code can't read. And you can use them to also ignore bits of code. So say in here we wanted to print this var name that we created before, which is equal to 2. What we can do is we can make the code ignore this by turning it into a comment. And then we can't see the printout anymore, because basically anytime Python gets to a line and it starts with a hash, it says, oh, this isn't for me, I don't need to read it. Now, on Macs in Visual Studio, if you press Command and /, you can change a line from code into comments. This is super useful. And on Windows, this is just Control. Okay, so the other thing to remember with variable names is just to be descriptive, because you don't want to create some variable called Steve or Bob or something and then come back later and think, what is Steve? I don't know what Steve is. You can separate out words in variable names with underscores. You can't add spaces because this will raise a syntax error because it doesn't know what B is and it's not being assigned to anything. So as long as you have the underscore in there, it reads this as one word, and variables have to be one word basically. And now this is equal to help. Cool. There's also a different way of typing called camel type that people like to use as well, whereas when you get to the next word, you just add a capital letter. Yep. So these both work. These are both functional variables. And if we wanted to check what was inside them, then we can just use print. So remember, you can autocomplete things either by pressing tab or by pressing enter. Cool. So yeah, just be as descriptive as possible with your variable names, because you might assign a variable and then you've got no idea what it is later, and that's going to be super annoying, and you don't have to go back through your code to find what you've assigned a certain value to. So let's just talk about why we need variables. So obviously so far we've just basically assigned strings, which is text, or numbers to these variables. And that might not seem like, you can just type 2, right? And it's not often you're going to assign very simple numbers to variables. What you might want to do is assign things that you're going to use over and over again. And maybe stuff that you can't remember. Like, I can't often remember what pi is. So maybe I'm using pi a lot. Maybe I'm doing a lot of things with circles, or I don't know, areas of cells or something. And I want to remember pi to so many decimal places. This isn't easy to remember, right? So we can just store this as pi, and then anytime we want to use this number, we can just call it back up, because we can basically print pi. So obviously there are ways inside of Python to get to pi without having to remember it and type it out. But maybe you have some constant that you always need for your analysis, and then you would save that inside a variable. You can also store tables inside of variables. Anything that we use inside of code is going to be stored inside a variable of some sort. Now, the other thing about variables is that basically you can update and change them. So you might have something that you want to keep track of, for example. I don't know. So let's say we have a number of friends. And we'll start off with 10 friends. So you start off with 10 friends, and we have 10 friends, right? But then say one of these friends is just awful, like my typing. Sorry, I'm trying to read off one thing and type on another. So say you have this like awful friend. How would we express that? So this is basically just going to be our number of, so we want to get rid of this friend. So we can say this is number of friends minus 1, right? And if we were to print this, then this gives us 9. But this hasn't changed the number of friends. So if we're going to keep track of this, we want to be able to update number of friends each time we do this. So one way that we could do this is to just reassign. So if we had like the number of friends, we could then just make number of friends, we could reassign it to the value of the original number of friends minus 1. And then now our number of friends is equal to 9 rather than the original number, which was 10. But this is actually quite long code. And inside Python, you can do some shorthand, basically. If you want to update a variable, there's a way of doing this. So say we wanted to remove another friend from this number, we could say minus equals 1. And so, okay. And we can see every time we run this block now, the number of friends is going down by 1 because we're doing this minus equals 1. And similarly, we could have a number of friends plus equal 1. And then every time we run this code block, the number of friends goes up by 1. Okay. So say we lose that 1 friend and we're down to 9 friends. Say they then take half those friends with them. We can also do divide equals. So we could say divide equals 2. And then we would get half the number of friends out. So up until this point, you'll notice that we've been returning whole numbers. And you might say, well, that's not unusual. We've just been adding and subtracting. And that's true. But you'll notice in Python, when we divide, we get what's called a float. So this is a decimalized number. Now, in some programming languages, when you divide, it doesn't just automatically return a float value. But in Python, it does, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, we keep changing this number of friends. So maybe it would have been smart to have another variable called original number of friends. And then we can keep track of that. Now we can sort of see how we can use variables to keep track of different numbers and update them. And then we can do things like, simple maths. We don't need to type out numbers. We can just use these variables to refer back to numbers, right? Okay, so if we wanted just to have the percentage of friends we have remaining, we could also keep track of that. And we could basically just calculate this using the variables that we have. So number of friends divided by original number of friends, and then times that by 100. Okay. And then we can just print this. Okay, and then we can see that we have 45% of our friends remaining. Now, in print statements, you can print as many things as you want, pretty much. So we could write text in here inside these inverted commas and make this print out something, a bit nice compared to just the number. So we can say percentage of friends remaining. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap this up here. Like I say, there'll actually be a slightly nicer version of this file available with some more explanations on my GitHub, and I will link to that in the video description. And basically, today we've just looked at variables, what they are, how we use them. They're basically just ways of storing things that we want to use later in our code. And as long as we make our variable names nice and descriptive, then it's easy for us to find the variable, whether it's a table that we're super interested in or just a number that we need to use over and over again. We can also update variables to keep track of things. Okay, so thanks for watching. In the next video, I'm going to go a bit more into numbers and strings and things that we can do with those. And then in the video after that, we will look at different ways of storing multiple types of data in longer formats. So lists which are more useful and then we can iterate over. And then after that, we should be able to start looking at some basic data analysis and writing some of our own functions. So remember, if you have any questions, to leave them in the comments below. I will see you in the next video.